Welcome to the Mega Blast Podcast. I'm your host, Jason McDonald. My goal is to get to the truth through conversation. The Mega Blast Podcast is produced by Arts and Opinion, an online journal housed at the Archives of Canada. Visit us at artsandopinion.com. I hope you enjoy today's guest. Welcome, Liz Hodgson. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Jason?
Fine. So I'm here with Liz Hodgson. This is the second time that you've been on the Mega Blast podcast. The last time you were on was one of the most successful ones I've done. I don't know if you know this. Yeah, I know.
Wow.
I can see your face, and it's just like, wow. What is that? What's going on there? But you saw it, like when we put it up originally, it did pretty well on Arts and Opinion, and then I got onto Podbean and I republished it, and I remember I sent it to you, and you shared it again, and it seemed to do pretty well among your people.
Didn't your boss say it was the photo? It was the image that you used when I looked like a depressed alcoholic?
Yeah, but I don't want to be too forward, but it's kind of a sexy photo, I think. I don't know. It's a nice, you look really good in that picture. It's got a kind of a pouty sort of a look to it, you know? So I don't know if that.
Just to make sure that I'm not doing anything larcenous, or I'm going to be honest about my larceny. That picture's about 10 years old.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we all have to be as honest and dishonest as we have to be, right?
It suits us.
Yeah. And then I republished it again because what I've been doing is I've been pulling certain ones and transforming them into YouTube videos. So that I've got a few up on YouTube and on YouTube, it's got the highest number of anyone I've done. And it's really interesting because I've done podcasts with people who are pretty well known. Albert Nirenberg, who is like, he had like 11 million people watching his hypnosis video on YouTube. It was a TED Talk he did. Yeah, I know. So when I did the thing, and we had a good talk and it was fun. I did. You listened to it?
Yeah.
Oh, great. Okay. And so when I popped that one, I was like, wow, this is going to be huge. And it got not that many, like compared to you and some of the other ones I've done. And so I just wanted to say thank you. And to whoever's listening to us, who seems to like you and maybe me talking together, thank all of you. So I thought I'd get that out of the way. Good. So the objective of today's podcast originally was to bring on a friend of mine who had some I wouldn't call them criticisms. They're sort of observations about the discussion we had to do. The other discussion was about Me Too and feminism and all this stuff. And my friend, who's also been on the podcast, decided he was unable to do it for complicated reasons. So I've made a list. But in light of what's been happening, I thought we'd start with Elon Musk, just because you mentioned you wanted to talk about Elon Musk. So I've sort of flipped it around. Originally, so I thought we'd start with, so just to be clear of where we are, it's very topical, right? Musk yesterday put up this poll, I'm sure you saw, should I resign, yes or no? And this is what I understand has happened. 57% of people polled said he should resign, and he's going to abide by that. I believe, is it true that Lex Fridman has been nominated as his successor? Lex Fridman, the MIT researcher who has a podcast. I've heard some rumors about this circulating around.
Well, I saw his offer. He offered to do it with no salary. And Elon's reply was, you have to put your life savings into it.
Right. Skin in the game, I think, was the term Elon Musk used, right?
Yeah, and the answer was yes, but I haven't heard anything confirmed. But it sure makes for hilarious memeing, because it's like, it's going to be Kanye West, it's going to be Donald Trump. And then the funniest meme was that they put golden tickets in 5 Teslas. And so you had to, it was obviously a reference to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. So you get the golden ticket, and then you get to go visit the Tesla factory, and then you go through a series of moral challenges. So he figures out which one is left with the highest moral cachet and will become the leader of Twitter.
Oh my God. Wow.
And then somebody posted a picture of the original Willy Wonka, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie, and they had a picture.
Gene Wilder? Is it
Gene Wilder?
Yeah.
And all the little urchins that were all vying to win, and they said photograph of Elon Musk choosing his successor. Twitter is funny.
It's really funny. And so it's kind of, there's a comedic aspect to this whole Twitter. I don't know how to describe this. Basically, it's since Elon Musk even decided he wanted to buy Twitter up until when he actually did it, there's been this sort of, I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of a, there's just a lot of people are some people are very happy. Like, I'll just explain what I thought. Originally, when I heard about it months ago, I thought it's probably not so good to have one individual having so much power, direct power, because, Twitter had a board of CEO, like a group of people. They didn't have one. But then I thought about it, and I thought it's such a mess on Twitter. It's just such a disaster that maybe one person with the right kind of thinking, sometimes you need someone to really kind of, manage things. When there's a crisis, let's say, you need someone who's going to just say, okay, we're doing this and we're doing that. We're not going to waste time with that. There's a kind of a precedent for that. If you think about something like, just historical, there's lots of precedents, but I don't know. I mean, there are people who I know who I really respect who are very reticent of his tenure at Twitter so far. And I'm trying to understand what has been happening. Like, I've been following these Twitter files that Matt Taibbi, he's presented these things where the Twitter, the CEOs and the high people were meeting with the FBI and the NSA, big government things, and they were doing spying for them. They were not spying is the wrong word, but passing information to them, which sounds very sinister to me. I've heard contradictory reports about some of the other stuff. I don't know. Do you have any comments about any of that stuff? The sort of dirt behind that's coming out now. How much of it is spin? I had a friend today tell me you're being spun by this stuff. Like, he doesn't really. So I don't know how to think about it. I wonder if you have any thoughts about it.
What's an interesting take? I mean, just to quickly go back for 1 second about, is Elon up for this task? Would it be better if they had some kind of quorum? So it's Twitter 1.0, Twitter 2.0. Well, Twitter 1.0 was a mess. People were paying cash for their blue checks. There were so many bots. There were people that had like 64 million followers, and they'd post something and it would get like 8 likes. So
what's going on there?
What is going on? And so after, some wrangling, whether Elon was forced to buy it or it's hard to say exactly what went on there, but, he takes control.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just clarify what you mean, Elon being forced to buy it? Like what?
Well, remember there was, first of all, he made the offer and all of the board, which was very worried about the health of the company, they all got dollar signs in their eyes. Right. And they thought this is a very generous offer and we would be crazy to not accept it. And then I don't know if Elon got cold feet, realized he was stepping into a snake pit, but at any rate, he made this grand statement about he was going to withdraw his offer because they were dishonest about the number of bots.
Yeah, I wanted to say something quickly about that. He just quickly to clarify the bots. He said that he just wanted them to reveal how they knew there were only 5% of the accounts were fake accounts. And he said they could do it. I believe he said they could do it in camera, just show him. They didn't have to show it to the whole world and all this stuff, just so he could know before he buy. You're going to spend $44 billion on something. You wanted to look under the hood and check it out, right? And apparently they refused, which was very suspect. It was very weird. And then for a long time, it looked like the deal was canceled, and it was very strange. And then all of a sudden, it seemed to be reanimated. Anyway, sorry, continue your story. I just wanted to clarify the thing about the bots for the buying of it a little bit. But
well, I mean, it's hard to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. But in terms of, is Elon capable of running Twitter? Duh, it's a website. Come on. It's not rocket science.
Which he literally,
Yeah.
He literally is a rocket scientist, right?
The tearing of the garments about this is it's utterly ludicrous. Of course he can run Twitter. Of course he can. What he doesn't know, he has other people to run. It sounds like their algorithm was a mess.
Yeah.
They did have a serious bot problem. And then at the same time, they had this insufferably woke, mostly useless workforce. Like, did you catch that TikTok video, A Day in the Life of a Twitter Worker?
No.
Well, along comes this millennial Gen Zer with the vocal fry. And she says, this is my day at Twitter. And there's going to be some meetings in here. And then, this is where we do yoga. And then I'm going to have a Zen matcha tea. And he was like, how do I get that job? They probably had a great salary. And she obviously did nothing. It was mocked, universally mocked. So,
well, is it the doing nothing that is the problem, or is it the suppression of accounts?
Both.
19-1 in favor of, let's say, more left than right, let's say, right? So you have the suppression of, Milo Yiannopoulos, who's basically a right-wing troll, and of course Trump and so on. And then you've got Hezbollah and Antifa. I've heard reports that Antifa literally was planning riots on Twitter. I've heard that they were like planning to meet and actually do damage to things, and they were coordinating on Twitter, and there was no suppression of that, right?
No.
So I'm not so sure that the problem, just my personal view would be, if they're sitting around doing nothing, that might be better. If they, right? If they just were doing yoga, they just weren't moderating anything, it might be less. It's the really zealous ones that seem to be causing the trouble, but I don't know.
That's how a lot of people feel about government. They go, "Oh, it's going to be a lame duck session, and this government won't be able to get anything done," and everyone breathes a sigh of relief.
Yeah, it's like thank God. You don't want them to.
More taxes, more bike helmet regulations.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting take. I mean, it sounds like a funny video, but it also makes me think the problem seems to be the ideology behind it seemed to be.
Well, this is high tech. It goes with the territory. I mean, it is filled with insufferably woke, very unhappy cat people who, it's like, you got to come back to the office. And they're like, no. Although, having said that, this is an aside. If you don't live near Twitter headquarters and you live further out in some leafy, beautiful exurb, getting there is probably a bit of a problem. It's probably really expensive. That's a city that doesn't have a lot of good municipal policies to make it a living city. That, just to get back to the leadership for a second, it's like the leadership of anything. It's like, basically, you need your Lee Kuan Yew, right? The Singaporean, the guy who saved Singapore from, total third worldom. He was a benevolent dictator, although some would say not so benevolent, because you get caning for spitting your gum out in an elevator, right? But it needs a benevolent dictator with a sharp mind, and I don't know,
a vision, maybe
a vision, obviously. Yeah. And the vision when you're dealing with anything corporate is not rocket science. it needs to make money
Right.
and run efficiently. And that's pretty simple. And that's,
Is it that simple? I mean, is it like, I don't know. Like, I've heard that Twitter's losing money, and I don't know.
Well, its usership is up. I don't think we know yet how much money it's making, or if its all-time records of usership is going to translate into the money that it needs. I think that's TBD. But is there somebody who might be 10% more capable than Elon? Is there somebody who'll be 10% less capable? It's not like he's going to walk away from it, right? He's just not going to have that title. So, and I think it's kind of charming the way he's letting all of this play out in polling. That's very funny.
Yeah.
I don't think it probably behind closed doors probably doesn't mean a lot. It's probably like, maybe I should step down because there's so much attention on him. He has become such he's a lightning
rod.
He's a lightning a red dwarf. I mean, he's become so huge. 10, 11 million people had voted in an hour or something.
Is that what it was? Wow. Yeah.
The numbers were huge. So
I was a little bit surprised, honestly, that it went against him. I kind of thought, I know there's a lot of haters out there, but I thought the haters were louder than. Although I heard from my cousin, who's very not the cousin who you are familiar with, his brother is very pro Tesla and pro Elon Musk, and he voted for him to step down. And he told me he thought it's not the right thing for him to be doing this kind of thing. So some people may have voted for him to step down just because they think Elon Musk's talents might be better served building rockets and going to Mars, maybe, right? Because he only has so much time. Or they want their
Tesla stock to go up.
Right. Again. Yeah. That's another possibility, right? The stock of Tesla dropping. Is that maybe part of his calculation? I don't know.
It's not all haters for sure. It's a lot of haters, though.
Yeah.
I mean, the left has lost its mind. Its hair went on fire.
I know. And also there's this hilarious thing of people who, the Sam Harris types who Sam Harris literally went on record saying I wouldn't care about Hunter Biden's laptop, I wouldn't care. It's like, well, to stop Trump, right? We have to stop Trump. So in other words, the ends justify the means. We can suppress media stories. We should suppress media stories if there's, Hitler about to become elected kind of thing. All the people who were saying that now are screaming free speech when their accounts are deactivated. Now why their accounts are being deactivated is not clear to me because I'm not following it that closely. So there could be a logical, a kind of a reasonable thing to say that maybe those accounts shouldn't be deactivated. I mean, I don't know. I heard some talk of just some doxing that happened. Elon Musk's children were on a plane somewhere, and somehow the information of that plane was released by some journalists, which meant that people knew where his children were, which is clearly a security risk, given he's such a polarizing figure. That is not clear if that was deliberate or if that was a mistake, because journalists sometimes screw up. I don't know if you have any information on that event. That was just the other day, so I don't know.
Well, I think a couple of times Elon has done things irrationally. He's obviously just getting his Bambi legs because, one of the first things was he published an article about Paul Pelosi. He didn't publish it, he posted it. And it was like, this Paul Pelosi stuff, the things that were being suggested about him were very sordid. But the suggestion was that his intruder was his gay prostitute, blah, blah, blah. So, and Elon posted something quite salacious. And I think, you can tell a lot about the guy. He obviously just did it sort of spur of the moment. Maybe it made him giggle or something. And then he quickly dialed back and someone said, no, that's not cool. That has
he deleted it, right?
He deleted it.
The one
and he apologized.
Right. Okay.
But and then with these other things, like, when someone's coming at your kid people don't really stop to rationalize things. He's just like, okay, I'm going scorched earth. You come at me, you're going to pay the price. And I mean, he has had a lot of threats. And then I've seen perfectly sane, non-paranoid people saying, hey, you really should watch your back. Yeah. So, and that's not a fun position to be in. So he's got
kids should be off limits. Yeah. Kids are innocent, like they're, your children and Elon Musk's children didn't choose to be born to be your kids, or, they ended up that way. So involving children in any sort of not a threat, but let's say a conflict. If you're in a conflict with someone and you bring their children into it, there's something deeply immoral about that. That should be just denounced wholeheartedly somehow. Now, again, just to be clear, we don't know if that doxing was an accident or if it was kind of like, here's where they are, So
it was just really that's another hilarious meme. It was the fuck around, find out. Am I allowed to swear? Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No one's listening anyway, so
you can cut it out. It was the fuck around and find out graph. So the x-axis is fuck around and the y-axis is find out. And they have like a scientist-looking guy explaining it. It's like, don't even think about doxing, okay? Yeah. Don't even think about it. There's a new sheriff in town, and we're not going to put up with it. And that's why I think this Taylor Lorenz nut job. I mean, I don't think that she reached out to Elon for a comment, and then the next thing you know, she was turfed. Okay. And then, I mean, I can't quite figure out what's going on there because she's kind of still on there. So maybe it's her dog's account. Right. But yeah. Everybody's got a burner account in the background just so they can keep watching the show. You know what I mean? But
yeah. So just to be clear, Taylor Lorenz is the journalist who released the information of where his children were?
No, she's just another in a line of journalists who've been turfed. Okay. And it was unclear that the reasons were a bit murky, whether it was 7 days or whether it was permanent was murky. But the last I looked, Taylor Lorenz was permanently deleted.
Wow. Okay.
And she's somebody who's got quite a few followers, although she gets so much shade that she went from protecting her tweets, meaning you couldn't comment. I'm pretty sure she went, whoever handles her Twitter, because it's pretty big, I'm pretty sure that they just auto deleted a number. Wow. Like I've never commented on a Taylor Lorenz post. She doesn't follow me, obviously. But one day I just someone mentioned something about it, Taylor being at it again. And I went to look and I was blocked. I don't do much on Twitter. I don't comment. It's just my news aggregate. So I was blocked. So clearly I was blocked because I follow other followers. So
right. So that implies a mass blocking of some kind, right?
Of some kind, yeah. So that she can exist in her perfect little echo chamber. Yeah. She's a real lunatic. I mean, I can't believe she's actually real. It feels like she was dreamt up by some critical theory profs around a cauldron. Like, she's so absurd.
That's kind of like that there's that British journalist who and comedian who created Tatiana McGrath. Do you remember this? Yeah. That's what that reminds me of, this sort of avatar for all the most insane sort of ideas that sort of boil together, and there's a lot of people who actually seem like they're not real who are real. Right, which is kind of weird, right? I mean, I've had friends of mine who, we're kind of discussing, people commenting on Facebook and Twitter, and my friend will say, "Oh, that guy, I think his account's fake or whatever." And then I realize, like, that's a real person. Like, I know people who've met that person. So I'm thinking, there are people who have views that, like, when they express them, it almost seems cartoon-like. There's something like, it's almost like they're just regurgitating, but maybe that's just me. Maybe they see the same thing. They read what I'm writing too, right? So I don't know. It's hard.
No. We live in a time where you can't differentiate between real and parody. And when you're dealing with progressives, it becomes harder and harder to tell all the time. I mean, their views are ludicrous. They're crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. I'm always trying this, I'm always trying to sort of understand, like when I see a person who has a very different, view, I'll name a couple of names, people I spar with. Julian Feldman, you may have bumped into him. I think you did on because he's constantly, he came after, he's tried to cancel a couple of times.
That
yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, right. So he tried to cancel me. The funniest thing is he trolls me to the point where he's listening to my podcast, trying to hear me say racist stuff. Like, it's so funny. It's like he's so dedicated to finding, to canceling me or trying to, And so whenever I'm sort of in an interaction with him I'm just using him as an example. I'm trying to imagine, why does he believe what he believes? Does he, there must be some, I know he's a real person. I know people who know him. I know that he's trying to do good in the world. And he's like, I think he is. I really, he's a school board commissioner for the English Montreal School Board. And he's, going against Bill 21 and doing all these court cases and stuff. And I know he's motivated by I think he's motivated by something where he wants to make the world a better place. I really, so if he has these views, what do they mean? And how am I supposed to interact with them? I don't know. Or
well, Julian, if you're listening right now, go outside and touch the grass, feel it under your feet. Because there's nothing for you here.
Right.
I hear you too. And sometimes that's kind of like an old marriage counselor trick where a couple's fighting over something and the counselor say, well, you make the case for his case.
Steel man, right? It's a kind of steel manning, right?
Yeah. So, and I've done that. And there's been times where I'd be like, yeah, I get it. I understand. I see that. I mean, I don't want to, I kind of fall down these rabbit holes, but I think there at some point, there's that old saying, he was so open-minded, his brain fell out.
Right. I've never heard that. That's good though. So
you want to be open-minded.
Yeah.
You want to be open-minded, but when something is so on its face, ridiculous.
So stupid. Yeah.
But I get it. And one of the nicest things that I've seen in these like toxically divided times that we're living through was the Supreme Court Justice who said about Clarence Thomas. She defended him. I mean, there's opposite as you can get. And she said, this is Sotomayor, Justice Sotomayor. And she said, he's a good man. Yeah. She goes, we may see things differently. We want to see everybody pull up their bootstraps, but I just see it as some people need help.
Yeah.
And he sees it as do it yourself. And other than that, your views wind up when you meet face to face, your views wind up coming very close, and only like a smidgen that divides you, that might even just depend on where you're standing. Like, when they show those accidents and they ask 5 different people, what did you see happen? It's like the pedestrian ran out and the light hadn't changed. The other person says, no, the light had changed. The pedestrian was fine. It might just be a simple matter of perspective.
Yeah.
But I also think there's more to it than that. There's people who feel things and there's people who think things. Mm. And there's also a male perspective. Just look at the data on this. Look at the data when it comes to capital punishment. Who favors it in larger numbers? Men.
Is it men? Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. There's a DNA component there.
So what do you think let's talk a little bit about this. So what do you think is motivating that women are programmed, to use the Jordan Peterson thinking, that women are biologically programmed to show compassion? And the reason for that is because when you have an infant who you just have to have compassion for that infant. That infant cries, you have to figure out that infant is right. Whatever, like you can't get into a back and forth with stop crying because it's not logical when the 6-month-old baby. So women are programmed to be that way because they're biologically nurturing small infants. and men are biologically programmed to do other things on average. This is all averaged out. So this would translate to the death penalty, meaning that women would be programmed to see compassion for those people who are going to be executed by the state. Is that is that how?
Yeah, I mean,
right?
They'll feel that compassion whether they want to or not. I mean, some will, others won't.
That's right. As I said, these are averages. I mean, there are men who are very, very feminine, and there are women who are very, very masculine. And, Just make that very clear. We're not saying, I'm not saying at all that all men are, whatever, these football playing hooligan type people, whatever.
Well, someone said men are interested in things and women are interested in people.
On average, yeah, that's generally true, right?
Yeah, and then you notice this with political involvement. Women tend to vote in equal numbers to men, but in terms of positions that are held and lobbying positions and that kind of thing, their involvement is much lower. But how did we get onto that again?
Just this thing. Yeah. I mean, well, that's a good question to go back to Elon Musk, but just, we were talking about gender. I mean, I wonder if we just continue with this gender thing, because that's where I wanted to go anyway.
Oh yeah.
Unless it's a good segue. Unless you have something else you wanted to say about Elon Musk. I kind of feel like it's like the thick of war right now, the fog of war. I don't really know what to think about what's going just with Elon Musk. I don't know how to think about it, because there's all these different reports happening and there are these things happening, and it's.
Well, what I think is I have a lived experience with coders and high-tech people, and they are an interesting bunch. They're like, I mean, look at Sam Bankman-Fried, for example. There's this slob with a Jufro, this belly hanging out. And it's like these venture capital guys walk in with $3,000 suits and $200 haircuts. And they're like, I want to work with this guy. He's a real deal. And it's like, really? So, I mean, so you get these coders and they're like, oh, this is the way we do things around here. They think they know everything. They're so smug. They're so arrogant. It's just code, man. Get over yourself. And then if you follow this story along, we learned a lot about computer programs and what's the word? Hang on. Well, oh, sorry about Rosie. Shush, 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 shush.
That's Liz's dog in the background for everyone listening.
I'm sorry.
Okay.
Setu, call the dog up. So, okay.
Sam Bankman-Fried. Yeah. So you're talking about Sam Bankman-Fried and about coders.
Okay.
Right?
Yes. Okay. And so Elon comes in and he fires all these people, right?
Right.
He just goes, So do you remember that Boeing jet that kept falling out of the sky?
Yeah.
So there was some kind of multiple disasters that went on all at once. But if you're on a project and it starts to drag down and you're missing deadlines and the code's not working, there's a rule in this world that the more people you add onto the project, the more it drags down.
Yeah.
And the thing about code is it's not hard for him to lasso a few of them who write beautiful, clean code and who agree with him on principle, on concepts like free speech, not having algorithms that exclude people with views contrary to this little world inside Silicon Valley where everybody thinks exactly the same. And it's like, no, that's not what we're about. And we don't want that. If you want that, go to Mastodon. So
it's interesting. So you're making a case that Elon Musk, just to be clear, you're talking about Elon Musk and not Sam Bankman-Fried, right? That he is a person who believes in free speech. He's also an outsider from the rest of them in Silicon Valley are very, it's a very, not hermetic's the wrong word, but it's the coast of California in the San Francisco Bay Area where people, right, they've got a certain culture that goes back a long way, and they've got, you know, that you know, where the internet was created. These are incredibly smart and creative people who developed
Tons of smart people
thing, right?
Yeah.
But they are in a, you know, they're, I would say that they're not entirely connected with other parts of their own country. Right. There's a guy called Victor Davis Hanson who talks about, he has a farm in the middle of California, and he's a classics professor. You may know him. And he talks about how people in San Francisco, they often, if you ask them their favorite restaurant in Shanghai, they'll be able to be like, oh yeah, this is great, or Paris or whatever. But if you ask them about Bakersfield, like something like right, not far away in their own state, they won't know anything about it. Right. So you've got this divide. That's part of the divide. And Musk is an outsider in many different ways. First of all, he's an immigrant, although many of them are immigrants, but he came from Los Angeles. He was, you know, he came literally from a different place that was in a different zone. And so he came in from the outside, but just to follow your line of logic, he is a brilliant person who can understand some of this code. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So maybe bringing those things together. I think I'm just trying to encapsulate the case you're making for Elon Musk. Does that sound right?
Like you say, you know, you're talking about earlier, like a lot of smart people in that area. Absolutely. Pioneers, real serious geniuses, brainiacs, MIT. But lately, there was a guy who had a Twitter thread, and it went pretty viral, and it was pretty compelling reading. And so he disguised the company that he worked at. A lot of people guessed Microsoft. And he said, Silicon Valley's headed for a big fall. And that's basically what it's experiencing now. I mean, it's not a pleasant place right now. But he said, you know,
what kind of a fall? I mean, not a financial one, but a sort of a
just they kind of hit the wall creatively.
Right.
The world he described was on his team in this software company. They would do these hilarious things in the morning or at the beginning of a meeting called wellness checks. So the team leader had to go around and say, "How are you doing?" And because there's a lot of mental health struggles and challenges and they're all at home, right? Everybody's working from home because everybody's been sent home. And these people are real COVID hysterics in that part of the world.
Yeah, that's true.
So they go around the table, the virtual table, and he goes, and the response was, no, these people are not all right. All of them would say, and they live alone with cats and stuff. They're LARPers and they're just really struggling. They're not very happy people. And when it got to him, it'd be like, how are you doing? And he'd go, well, I'm great. I'm at home, which is great. And my wife is here and we have a 5-year-old and I have a dog and I have a garden. And actually, I've never been happier in my life. And his teammates all seemed to really kind of resent that. They were like, oh, what's with this guy? And he said that because of the environment, because of everything that was going on in the world, their top-notch coders had left. So what was left was a lot of code that hadn't been updated. People weren't really working that hard. And he just said, and it always becomes like Ozymandias, right? Like 1 second you're not just king, you're king of kings.
Yeah.
And we all know what can happen. I just have to reply to this.
So this is, it's okay. So this is that's very interesting. So you're describing what sounds like, it sounds like you're bringing in the COVID, the lockdowns were part of this problem, people being isolated at home. And so there's mental health issues and sadness and isolation, being brought into this. These are many of the people who are working for these big companies like Twitter and Microsoft and Facebook. Many of them will be young-ish, so you could say in their mid-30s, but they're not settled, and they don't necessarily want to get married and have children, and that kind of thing. That it's not really what they're interested in doing for reasons that are not clear to me, but and that there's a lot of sadness there. Yeah.
That's another thing about Elon Musk. He's Generation X.
Yeah.
And
right.
and
he's got 5 kids. He's very pro-human, Elon Musk. He loves people, and he doesn't believe that the planet is overpopulated.
No, in fact, he worries about the opposite. He's
right, that we're actually going into a period of decline, which is actually, was it 92 out of the 193 countries in the world now that have declining populations right now. So,
everything that these woke progressives tell you, you just worry about the opposite. They're worried about global warming, but way more people die of cold.
Yeah, that's right.
They're worried about, they've been indoctrinated to believe that the world is overpopulated. The reality is, go to Korea. Yeah. Korea's facing population collapse. People aren't having children there. Go to Taiwan. Go to Japan. Just worry about the opposite of what a social justice warrior tells you to worry about. They're always going on, the right wants to destroy democracy. And it's but you're the one who wants to kill free speech. So
yeah. Free speech is the ultimate, freedom. In order to have a democracy, people have to be able to discuss things. It's yeah.
All I know is, as a Gen Xer, the first job I ever had, I was 14 years old. My sister was the manager of a busy restaurant in Calgary. She called my mother and said, "We need a hostess. Tell Liz to get down here." My mother called me upstairs and said, "Get down here. Put on something nice. Get down here. You're going to work." And I never worked in a restaurant. I didn't know anything. I was a dumb 14-year-old. And I said, "What do I do?" And she said,
stand at the door and smile at people.
No, she said, "Keep your head down and keep your mouth shut."
Right.
The
hostess isn't the person who's greeting people at the door. Isn't that what the hostess?
No, you clear glasses and you change ashtrays, which will tell you how old I am. A 14-year-old working in a smoky restaurant. Yeah. That's Generation X.
One of my first jobs when I was 14 was working in a restaurant as a dishwasher. And, I remember I liked it because I got a nice free meal that was really good. The food was good in the restaurant, and I could drink all the soda I wanted and, just go up. And I remember it was hard work, but I remember what I loved about it was I loved making my own money and feeling like I kind of had my own, sort of something for me. I wanted to have, I was very sort of proud and didn't want to take money from my father, who always was very generous with me. But yeah, so there could be, you're making a case there's possibly a generational.
But by the way, though, I would never want to besmirch an entire generation.
That's right. We should not, because it's not fair. All generations face challenges of different kinds. So we should definitely not besmirch a whole generation. And okay, so as we move towards, I want to move towards moving into the gender stuff. Liz has a couple of technical issues going on, so I'm going to outline the next part of our discussion, which is a follow-up to the gender relation discussion for the hold on. Okay, so there's basically what it is was originally a friend of mine who's also been on this podcast a number of times, a well-known local journalist. He listened to our discussion that we had regarding Me Too and Will Smith and Jian Ghomeshi and a bunch of other things. And he had some interesting thoughts. And so I compiled a list of his thoughts, and we're going to discuss them now. So following what I'm going to do, Liz, is I'm just going to outline some of my friends' observations, and you can I wanted to hear your thoughts on it. Okay, so we'll start with Will Smith. My friend claims, and I think he may be right about this, that we did not mention that Will Smith was triggered by extramarital affairs of his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith, right? I don't know if we didn't cover that because that seems, if we did miss it, that seems like a pretty important piece of that particular puzzle, right? Just to be clear, we're talking about Will Smith assaulting Chris Rock at the Grammys. And we had a long discussion about that. I still think it's very relevant what happened there, but if we did miss it, did you have any observations about that? From what I understand, Jada Pinkett Smith, they're in a quote unquote open marriage. So she openly has a lot of different affairs with other men, including one of them is a friend of their child's. Mm-hmm. Apparently, yeah. I don't know if it was a minor or it was a very young.
No, I don't think it was a minor.
It wasn't a minor, but still.
Known him, man.
What's that?
She might have known him when he was a minor.
Yeah, probably. Kind of like the Woody Allen thing. It's not that he didn't get together with her when, but he knew her when she was 6. It's kind of weird. But anyway, so that, and so, and from what I've heard about that, Will Smith himself does not really go around and exercise his right to live in an open marriage as much as Jada Pinkett Smith does. That's what I've heard. And people have speculated that led to a lot of repressed resentment on Will Smith's part, that he feels, he's trying to be this hip, cool, woke guy. I'm open and everything, and my wife's out screwing these other guys, and I can go and screw other women, and we're all kind of hip and cool. But there's a part of him that's just kind of burning with rage underneath there about that, at the idea that that's going on, right? And I don't know. Do you think that was part of it? Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I don't have a lot of insights into open marriages. But I would venture to guess that all of them are the same, and that one half of the couple is always a titch more enthusiastic than the other. That's just a feeling I get.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And that I think the reason why we didn't bring it up was that, okay, somehow he'd been feeling generally emasculated by Jada's outsized sexuality and a suggestion that he wasn't able to satisfy it, so she had to bring other guys into the marriage, right. Blah, blah, blah. I guess they really do things differently in Hollywood. Us normals are going, oh, well. But I think that we never approached that, because even if that were true, based on a kind of half-assed joke at the Oscars to stand up and walk over and smack the guy, it's like, I don't know. I don't care what problems you have going on in your life. You
don't attack some poor innocent third party. That's the other thing, is like, Chris Rock is like, he's nothing to do. Like, it's not like she had an affair with him, right?
No, exactly.
It's just this guy up there. And he wasn't telling a joke about that either, too, right? Like, he didn't, right? Like, he was
correct.
How attractive his wife was. So you could sort of shoehorn it in that maybe, I don't know.
Or find some, I think it's suggestive of a lot, though. So maybe it was kind of egregious that we left it out. It's like, okay, Will, your wife wants to have an open relationship. Maybe you're not that into it. What are you still doing there? Your kids are mostly grown up now, I think. What are you still doing there? What are you hanging around for? You don't want to be in an open marriage. You're a tall, handsome, rich.
It's not like he couldn't find another woman, for crying out loud.
Yeah, I guess. So I don't think that really lets him off the hook in any way.
I don't think my friend meant that it would let him off the hook, but I at all. In fact, I think what is meant by it is that it's an important piece of that puzzle. Because I think it is relevant. I think, I think you're absolutely right. First of all, to say that in open marriages, there's almost always one party that's going to be more enthusiastic about it. It's interesting when it's the woman, right? Because then in that case, it's the woman. You would imagine, just given how sexuality works, that men would be more enthusiastic about having other affairs than women. But I think very often it might not be. I remember once I was driving Uber and I picked up this woman, and she was from out of town. She's from somewhere, I don't know, like Toronto or Alberta or Vancouver or something. And she started telling me how she was in an open marriage and all this stuff and everything, and how she talked about how they got married and they were wearing like these S&M outfits and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, okay. It's like, well, that's kind of, and she was on her way to a tryst
party.
Well, something, from downtown to the plateau. She'd hooked up with someone on Tinder, and she's like, yeah, my husband's back in the hotel. He knows I'm going there and all this stuff. And then I was kind of like, just like, okay. And then and then somehow I remember she was saying, well, because she's, are you married? What about you and everything? I was like, yeah, I'm married. So I'm not really, I just have a normal, I'm not a life, it's just us two, like real dull, But, and she sort of, at one point, I seem to remember her saying, oh, well, you should do this. It's much better and all this kind of stuff. And I remember thinking, like, why are you, like, I don't know if I have an opinion on her lifestyle, but I wouldn't, personally, I don't think that's a way that's going to make a lot of people happy. But if it makes her happy, that's fine. I'm not going to tell her that she should be, it was interesting how she was saying to me, oh, you should do this. You'll be a lot happier or whatever. Like, what does she care if I'm happy or not? Right. It's like, right. If I'm in this boring, monogamous relationship,
Did you catch that viral Reddit?
No.
So this was a real interesting one. So this woman took to Reddit to say, please help Reddit. I'm in despair. So she goes on to describe the boyfriend. They have great sex, apparently. He earns his way. He's got a job. She's attracted to him. He's got good friends and good family. By sort of every measure, this is she's got herself a catch. This is a good guy on her hands. But then, she started thinking about how she's young and how these people that she's read about are experimenting with open relationships. And she just thought it'd be a good idea to broach it with him. And so
maybe I wonder about that assumption. Because just broaching the subject might actually cause trouble. But anyway, that's a parenthesis. Go ahead.
So she goes on to describe how she broached the subject with him. And he, first of all, asked her once, are you kidding? No. Asked her twice, are you kidding? No. Okay. And then he got up and quietly packed a bag and walked out the door.
Wow.
Blocked her on her phone and all social media. Wouldn't have any further communication with her. Sent a friend over to collect his stuff.
Wow.
And she said, help me, Reddit. I can't eat. I can't sleep. I'm in constant despair. I just wish I could see him and he could put his arms around me and tell me everything's okay. And I can tell him how sorry I am. And on Reddit, which, I mean, I don't really, Reddit's sort of not my bag because the kind of people that are on there, but Reddit was merciless. That was the fuck around and find out graph. And they were like, well, good luck to you, sweetie. Like, there was not one sympathetic comment. I mean, one or two people said, oh, sorry, good luck.
I kind of feel sorry for her myself. I mean, because I understand that she obviously made a mistake and she's not going to get that guy back, right?
No.
Because clearly he was not into that. It sounds like he was into just a straight up normal relationship and all that stuff. She sounds, from the way you're describing her, as a person who doesn't understand the concept of a monogamous relationship, right? A monogamous relationship it's not, I mean, the whole point of it is that you can, because, look, we can always get somebody better. right? I mean, any married person, I could also do a lot worse, right?
Yeah.
Like both statements are true. If you commit to one person, you are foregoing other possible relationships, possibly better ones, possibly worse ones, and so on and so forth. But that's not why you do it, right? It's not a transaction. A marriage is not like, I'm going to sign this contract, and I mean, it is technically a legal contract, but it's not. It's something where you say, okay, I'm going to dive in with this person for, and that's why it's supposed to be till you die, right? You're supposed to really, right?
And then if you're a believer, for eternity.
Right. Yeah. No, but it's interesting. It's funny how, I mean, I was explaining this to my students the other day about how, like, if because they're young, right? So they're sort of, and they seem sort of fascinated to hear this idea that if you commit to someone and you stay with them, then maybe after 10, 20, 30 years, you're going to be a different person, and you're going to develop you and that person are going to become something together that wouldn't necessarily have existed if you had just continued to play the field, right? And it's interesting how that's not articulated in our society. That's considered to be
not anymore,
right? It's and is it an outmoded value? Like, maybe we should be more individualistic and just be searching all the time for satisfaction ourselves.
Oh yeah, sure. You should try what she tried.
Yeah.
She won the Darwin Award of relationships. I mean, that's what it was. And the response was the same. It was like the guy who floated up with a lawn chair and all the balloons on top, because he wanted to prove that the earth was flat, and then he dies up there or whatever. And everyone's like, my reaction was, well, is the earth flat or not? It would have been nice to find out.
Yeah.
But she won the Darwin Awards. Like, she was so stupid to just trot that idea out. But like you say, it's not, I had some sympathy, because she's living in an environment where people are telling you, well, it's do what you feel day on The Simpsons, right? And it's like, well, sure, go ahead and try it. But I mean, I can tell you, you're not going to find a lot of happiness down that road.
Yeah.
And, we've seen this in action. I've seen it in action. I remember back when I lived in Vancouver 20 years ago, there was a couple that I knew, and he was very good looking guy, very charming guy, quite liked him. He's very chilled out. Used to smoke a lot of weed. She was a go-getter, and she was a real, she had an agenda. She liked her job. She wanted to get married. She wanted to have kids, and she realized that she's got a biological clock, right? And she laid it on the line, and she said, okay, so I need to know where's this going? Can we do this? Are we going to do this? And he hemmed and hawed. And then at the end of the day, he couldn't do it. And of course,
commit. Yeah.
She went on to marry a guy and have some kids. And
what happened to him?
I would see him hanging around the bars by himself, lurking at the bar, looking for another girl. I mean, I haven't seen him in a long time. Maybe
he found one.
Who knows? But he went through some serious misery.
Yeah.
And, this is how feminists raised kids in the 70s and 80s. My generation really got snagged in that. There were the T-shirts. My parents weren't exactly like this, but there's a T-shirt that said a woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle.
Yeah.
Women that 40 years old in fertility clinics with bought sperm. It's like, hey, try it, see if it works. I think you're going to find that you're lonely and miserable. And there are, just like Jordan Peterson says, sacrifices in life. And in a way, it's almost like some kind of cosmic joke, because God or nature creates man to be loyal and faithful, but also makes him very desirous of multiple women. So, and then you find that, but to your earlier point, women don't have the same sex drive, and yet you see these women that are leading the way in this regard. And yes, I've seen that too. And I'm not quite sure what's happening there. Maybe there is some kind of biological drive about finding some superior sperm for their procreation. Have you heard about competing sperm?
No. Well, I've heard that sperm compete with each other. I don't know if that must be the same thing then. That they
Women that have failed to conceive and then they have an affair and they conceive like that. There's some kind of biological process. I don't know, man. I know people are going to listen to this and go, oh, you got that prude on again. I'm just...
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, I just for full disclosure too, because this is a very personal issue for me, because I really live my life, much of my life, in that sort of like, well, I can do that. I don't need to commit to someone. I was very kind of individualistic. I lived in other countries, and and then late, I got married relatively late. I was 40 when I got married, and my wife was a few years younger. She was 6 or 7 years younger. And then anyway, it took some time, and so she actually has fertility issues. Just this is for full disclosure. So I've done a lot of thinking about if I had gotten married when I was younger, and if I if my life, how my life, because there is a regret that I carry, that I was so immature, and so it's entirely my doing. Like, I just want to make that very clear. I don't want anyone to think that I'm saying, oh, poor me, like I chose to be a very freewheeling person. And I still am a very open. I don't regret it at all, because I had all these amazing experiences, in my 20s and 30s, and especially traveling and so on. But when I look back, I see to myself, there's a few relationships I had where there's at least one where the girl really wanted to. I could see she really wanted. I had a girlfriend once who, she was from Africa, and we were dating and stuff. And she was a very nice person. We got along really well. And she, her family, they were I met her family and so on. And then I was this very sort of insecure. I thought, oh, okay, so I stopped calling her. This is like a typical guy thing, like just don't break up, just, so I did that. And it was so sad. She continued to call. And then after about a year, I just said, oh, okay, I'll call her back. And she actually was happy to hear from me. I was very surprised. I thought she was going to tell me to, and I looked back and I looked at her and I thought, wow, she would have been she had a very relaxed disposition that, that would have been a good parent for children and stuff. And I always felt guilty for treating her that way too, But just to say that that's a real, the idea of being monogamous is it's sort of a hard case to make and an easy case to make at the same time. And just to get back to Will Smith, it's not really working that well for Will Smith.
No, poor guy.
Yeah, like I do feel sorry for
about
him.
your situation, Jason.
Yeah.
40 is not actually, for a man, it's not actually that old. Yeah. And not one of us can say we've been impeccable toward people that we've been romantically involved with.
Yeah.
Certainly not me.
Yeah.
And also we're not born with a guidebook, and our generation, especially, we are the divorce generation. Divorce became no fault in our lifetimes. Like so many of my friends, very few. And I was the same as you. Like my parents were kind of bohemians. I remember I ran into this woman that I'd gone to high school with, and I ran into her after first year of university, and she told me she just returned back from Western. And I said, what are you studying there? She said, I'm getting my MRS degree. And I was like, you're what?
MRS?
She goes, MRS, my missus, like she'd gone there to meet a husband.
Oh, okay.
And that to me, it was like she was saying that she'd gone to Papua New Guinea to study cannibalism. It was just like, what? Like, this wasn't my bag. We weren't raised with hope chests. We were raised in a time where it was like individualism and feelings, exploring, finding your way. There was, whereas others that I knew in my neighborhood or at my school or at my university, they were like trained from a young age. Well, when you get married and start having kids, I can give you my china set. That wasn't, and the way it worked for me was I just expected, well, I don't think I'll ever get married and settle down. totally naive to think,
Yeah.
because there was a lot of suitors around, and you cannot believe how that drops off a cliff.
With women, yeah.
Whoa, it is shocking. You think they're going to be hovering around forever. Doesn't work that way.
It's very interesting how women I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think women have, this is my personal view, I think women have a harder time of it in life, generally speaking. I think the biology is harder on women. It comes to you earlier. And think about just a monthly period. Just think about like I don't have to deal with that for 30 years of my life, right? I mean, that strikes me as a very difficult thing to do for a few days every month. It's painful and all that, and then you have this thing of a young woman is extremely attractive. Many men are trying to get her. And that sort of starts at about, sort of early teens, let's say, up in through the 20s. And then all of a sudden it just collapses. It just goes down so quickly. And what age is it? Sort of mid 30s that men stop? What is that about?
Yeah, I believe, I'm not a biologist, but I believe that it really does coincide with your decline in fertility.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
But I mean, like for me personally, it was that I'd met somebody, and he was raised, he's also a product of divorce, but more or less a very happy family. And it was just sort of like, oh, no, we're going to do this. There was no hesitation. And I kind of thought, oh, well, he seems to know what he's doing. I guess I'll just go along in a very sort of haphazard way.
Is that your current husband? This is your,
yes.
Okay. That's nice. Okay. So he kind of talked you into it, or is that?
Well, he just kind of said very confidently, no, we're going to do this. He's the kind of guy who tends to get what he wants in life, which is great. But what's interesting is nowadays, in the world we live in now, Gen Xers and baby boomers, they could really get away with that stuff. Mm-hmm. A university degree. I mean, what was your tuition for one semester? Yeah. I think mine was $500.
Yeah.
Plus books.
I went to Concordia. I remember it was in the hundreds. Yeah. Which is a lot more now, right?
My rent was, I don't know, $200 a month.
Yeah.
We bought a house.
You were in Montreal at that time, right?
I did spend a semester or even a year in Montreal when I studied French at a Cégep. Oh, okay. But I went to University of Calgary. So, our rents were cheap. Life was affordable. Scott and I bought our first house with, what was our down payment? It was 25% of $320,000. That wouldn't even buy you a rabbit hutch in Scarborough. So
yeah,
shit has gotten real. Yeah. And my son, who's 17, I mean, the family is a unit of such extraordinary efficiency, especially when compared to the government, which is a bloated, hulking behemoth. An MC Escher painting, a Rube Goldberg machine, and that government gets more. What is it? 10% of the workforce? I think in Ontario, government workers like 20 to 25% of the workforce, just like subsidiaries and ancillaries, but making your money from the government. It's like
I do. So, I mean, my income as a Cégep professor is indirectly through government. I'm not proud of that necessarily, but it's just a matter of reality. Our education.
Well, you're a teacher. I mean, yeah, but I'm just saying, shit got real now. When you have, when a Shetu meets the woman of his dreams, he's suddenly you have two people that can contribute to the purchase of a house. Mm-hmm. Purchase of a house is your main path to financial, I wouldn't say security, but some kind of financial base, at least, to say you have something. And like my sister had a baby at 18. My sister had a baby in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and zeros.
Wow.
And so, she was 18.
With the same person or with different?
No.
Yeah.
18, it was a mistake and a shotgun wedding and a divorce a year later.
Wow.
Then she met then cut to 1983. She met another guy. They got together. They had a baby. They split up. She had 2 kids, single mother. And then she met her current husband sometime in the late 90s. She was pregnant at age 40 by 1999. And then 2000, they had another one. So
she has 5 children then.
So she has 4 children of her own. He has 2 children from a previous marriage. So between them, they have 6 kids. And between them, they have, like, I've lost count, 8 or 9 grandchildren. And she's 60 years old. So, but when she had that baby at 18, she had 4 siblings for free babysitting. She had 4 living grandparents. Her body was like
unit supporting. Yeah. I
don't know, she lost her baby weight in a week. You can. So the family unit, considering sort of what we're facing, what are we facing? Nobody's really quite sure, but we know that every single country in the West is facing trillions of dollars of debt. Costs for everything are spiraling out of control.
Inflation is a real problem right now.
Yeah, and spots in universities are getting more and more competitive. It's more and more government regulation is making it harder and harder to make a living as like a small business. You can keep working for the government, but the government lives on taxpayer money unless they're printing money. And we know what's happened as a result of, what has it been, 20 years of printing money, of quantitative easing and cheap money. And
some people say we never recovered from the 2008 financial collapse. Basically, the government, the Bank of Canada and the Federal Reserve basically just printed money out of that, pushed it further into the future. That's some people say this. Macroeconomics I find very, very hard to understand. Like how these sort of monetary things work. It's very, very hard for me to understand, but it's possible that we're reaching the end of the possibility of doing that, because inflation is finally starting to really happen now. It seems to have followed the COVID thing. I think that was basically the trigger. The COVID thing, everybody went home and they printed up zillions of dollars and vomited it on the population, right? And then all this stuff. And then now we have, what is it, 8-9% in Canada right now for inflation? It's very, very high, right?
Yeah, and that's kind of a fake number. I mean,
that's aggregated, right? So some things have gone up 100%, other things have gone up 2%, and all that kind of stuff, right? It's
Well, I tend to see things in I don't know anything about macroeconomics either. I just know what I see. Yeah. And I know the world that we grew up in and the world that our baby boomer forebears grew up in. And I know that world doesn't exist, that your best defense against it is become a new act of family. Buy a piece of land, some vegetables, and then trade for his eggs because you can't afford eggs anymore. And that caught my eye. There's some out of the States, everybody follows him for asked from young people. My answer is forget everything, just make money. Yeah. Later on, stage, you can form a garage band, but it's the equivalent of on the airplane before you put it on your kiss. This is your lifeline. And so what we were talking about before, and what I tell, and I don't know if he's listening. He's in a milieu. People aren't really sharing those ideas. In central Toronto, meaning it's very progressive, it's that he hangs around with at school, and them, the same things.
Can I just ask you, are you talking about your son? Are you talking about your son here when you mention this?
Oh, no problem.
Yeah.
Jason, we're having an audio problem.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
I hear you, but you're really muffled in a way.
Yeah, that's weird. Okay. So we got some technical issues. Hold on. So just to be clear, I want to clarify that I think it's hard and easy for every generation. I wouldn't say that. I would say it's harder for the upcoming generation right now, Gen Z or whatever it is, for many of the reasons you've described. But there are other things that they've had that are easier. They have, just the technology they have access to is so much better than what we have. Things, there's dropping costs. I never believe these things that, that say, the cost of living has spiraled, the costs of things have gone up, because when you compare to 20 or 30 years ago for everything. And the reason for that is there are so many things around now that we could only have dreamed about. Right.
True.
Just, and that people have access to, I like to joke to my students sometimes that, what do you do when you want to listen to music? And they, pop open your phone and pull it up. And I have to explain, it was like, when I was your age, I had to literally move my body to a store and pay money for this thing and then bring it home and listen to it. And then it would be, as Phil Spector said, famously, 2 hits and 10 pieces of junk, right? Like, right? I get, duped into buying an album by April Wine or whatever, and then, the other 10 songs are crap, So it's just to say, like, I think I would not, it's also, there's a sort of a bias, a hindsight bias. We look back at the past with rose-tinted glasses, almost literally, in the sense that we remember the positive things and some of the negative things we don't remember so much, right? So, by the way, I'm not disputing anything you're saying. Things were, in some senses, easier for those things, for the, for buying property and for going to university and all that kind of stuff. But did you have any final
comments? The question is, are we better off? And I mean, yeah. So two things jump into my mind. One of the subjects that came up recently was that Apple is very, very heavily invested in China. China's been very good to Apple. And
you mean for their manufacturing in particular, right?
Very close relationship.
The sales of products, I don't know so much as a market, if that is if that is as true as.
Yeah, that's another question. But
yeah. Certainly for the manufacturer of their goods, it's huge.
Yeah. But what was happening was Apple was, how did this work again? The Chinese were so frustrated by these absolutely crippling lockdowns. And so they started to protest. And Apple was somehow collaborating with the Communist Party of China to shut down protest-related communications. And that led me to comment somewhere on social media that the Apple iPhone was everything that is great and everything that is tragic about capitalism.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a very, very interesting observation, but go ahead.
And then somebody commented, an older guy, like a baby boomer, and he said, "What's great about it?" And I said, "Well, it's a beautiful product. Like, I'm talking to you on an iPad, and it is a beautifully designed product. I'm sorry, it just is, and I'm sorry about the conditions in which it was manufactured. But damn it, it's beautiful, and it always was." Jobs stole the idea of the WYSIWYG and the interactive from we had ugly DOS. It was just horrifying, and everything. The PCs were disgusting. Then Jobs went into Xerox PARC and he saw WYSIWYG and he saw this beautiful interface and he stole the whole concept, but he turned it into something so beautiful. And yes, it's disgusting what has happened to us. And that guy was like, not worth it. We'd still be better off without them. And I think, if I had to pick a side, I'd say that guy was right. We would be better off without them.
Would we? Do you really think
that? Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, think about it. Okay. when I'm 18 years old and I'm traveling around France. I don't speak a word of French. Or no, I do. I'm learning some French. My French is getting better, but I'm supposed to meet somebody, and I have the addresses, and I have to find the coordinates, and then I'm a little bit lost, and then I need to use a phone, so I have to go into a tabac, and I have a large bill, and I don't want to spend I don't have any money, and I don't want to buy, I want change. So I need to buy a small pack of gum, and I need to remember a phone number, and I need to solve that problem on my wits. Mm-hmm. And that means that you got to speak to another human being. You have to speak to him in his language. Those are painful moments that force growth. But now you've got a thing that tells you exactly where you are all the time, where you can easily communicate, where you can get your hands on money when you need it in 2 seconds flat. No struggle, no problem solving, so
yeah,
I love the convenience. Don't get me wrong. I love maps. I love,
there are always going to be things that people are going to have to do with each other. Right? There's no way that these iPhones are going to replace all of the experiential nature of life where people experience things together. Right? It's sort of like if you can imagine, which if you were to ask even an 18-year-old, which would you rather do? Go see your favorite rapper live at the Bell Center, or watch it streamed, onto a huge 50-inch TV with subwoofers, and you're at home, so you can vape and you can drink, and all that. I think most people, even young people, would say they'd rather go there and be there. Right? They'd rather be there. I think. Well, look, look at Strame or whatever. These a lot of young people out seeing shows and stuff. People are still going to shows. Is that no longer a thing? Is that?
They go to the show and they can't really get a good glimpse, and well,
that's like every rock show ever. You go in there, it's always like, the guy in front of you standing up or something, and then, you're kind of uncomfortable, and then you're waiting a long time for the show to start, but you're glad you did it, right? I mean, right?
Yeah, I think so. But I think especially after, 2 years of lockdowns, I think, there's always going to be people that buy the concert tickets. I do, but look at movie theaters.
Well, I think they're very expensive now, from what I've heard, right? They charge, and that's maybe some of the reason why nobody's going to movies. You go out to see a movie, it's like $23 for each ticket, and then you go buy the popcorn that's like $18 for, right? You know what I mean? It's like, what? You go to the cinema, it cost me $100 to go with my family,
Try going to a Raptors game.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that I do understand what you're saying. I think there's a lot of issues with people not using their own minds, basically. But there's always going to be some way for people to find their way in the world. And young people, I guess, well, if we're going to transmit something to them, it's that they have to find what that's going to be. Right? They have to find what they can do to bring to the world, which is really hard for every generation, every young person coming into the world. When I think back to myself when I was younger, I didn't know what the hell was going on most of the time. I was going around when I was as a teenager, and I was lost half the time. Not lost in the sense that you're talking about, where am I going to get to, but just I was confused most of the time. And I thought I was doing something wrong most of the time, because I probably was. I didn't understand how to act in the world, right? And the whole process of life is, and not that I understand how to do it now necessarily, but I have a better idea of how to do it now than I did then. But of course, I'm older, so I don't have the same energy that I had when I was 20. So there's a trade-off there, right?
There's a trade-off.
Yeah.
I know. I reached these landmarks age, and I go, oh, I can't believe how stupid I used to be, but I'm really smart now.
Yeah.
So it's all good. And then 10 years later,
you're like, what the hell? How stupid was I 10 years ago? Right? Okay. So the final thing that we can close on, there's two things quickly here. There was an observation, just to get to Gian Gomeshi. My friend mentioned that because we had a long discussion about Gomeshi.
I remember that.
Things.
Yeah.
It was very interesting. My friend mentioned that some of the women had given consent before what happened to them. Now, I don't know. First of all, I don't know if that's true. It could be true. It reminds me a little bit of the R. Kelly thing. You remember R. Kelly, this rapper? He had these sex slaves, and apparently they had signed consent forms. They had to become his slaves, which raises the whole question of, if you sign a consent form to be a slave, are you really a slave? It's not clear that, right? The whole point of a slave is that you don't choose to be, and you're enslaved against your will, right? But I just wanted to ask you, first of all, do you know anything about that? Second of all, would it make a difference if those women had signed, or is it still reprehensible? I don't know if you know anything.
Yeah, that's a really good point. R. Kelly is the extreme of all the problems we've been describing all this time. He's when you've taken it to the complete extreme. So
how so?
He just proves my point about everything.
Can you elaborate what you mean? How does he?
Well, he's the guy. I mean, the guy's a monster, but he's taken that "do what you feel" day.
Right.
He did what he felt. So yes, I know exactly what your friend's referring to. They did. They chased after him. Gomeshi, I'm talking about. They wanted to be his girlfriend. Then the assaults that they later reported, these assaults were followed up by these girls continuing to pursue him. And that's very puzzling to people. And it seems puzzling on its face, but inside of it, I think it winds up making a lot of sense. So there were the two people that he faced in court, the court case where the judge decided in Gomeshi's favor, because it was all hearsay. But some of the most damning evidence was raised by Haneen, Gomeshi's lawyer, was one of the women. She followed up this sexual assault with a bikini pic. He still had it. This guy was a real saver. And then the other one, the actress he dated, Lucy, she, after the claim to be assaulted, she followed up with I think it was a 10-page handwritten letter that was very romantic.
Wow.
And that was very damning. And everyone's like, oh, come on. And that fed the fire of a lot of people who were saying, oh, this is a hatchet job, and they're just going after him because he has money and they want to bring down someone who's great. And no, this territory has been well covered. And this is an attempt by a victim to normalize and kind of process it emotionally, to maybe say, well, I did have a hand in this, or maybe I wasn't assaulted if the relationship is ongoing. I mean, it's definitely
so it's
not
a kind
rational.
of denial. You're saying to write a letter, a 10-page romantic letter after you've been attacked physically by a person, is a kind of way that person is denying the reality of that they really are a victim. Is that what you mean?
Yes, and trying to, it's a coping mechanism. By no means does this mean that she wasn't assaulted.
Yeah.
Not even close. Women get raped and go out with the guy again. It happens all the time.
I was just going to say, it's think about how many women who are regularly beaten by their husbands and boyfriends.
And there's men
that still he's a good person underneath that. He doesn't mean it. He just making all these excuses for the guy. And
importantly, what your friend might have been referring to, some of these women, when he maybe proposed the idea of a little BDSM, they said, okay, sure, I'll give it a try.
Right.
And I've always had a theory about BDSM. They call it what does that ridiculous acronym even stand for? It stands for, the S and the M are sadomasochism. I honestly believe that there's always some part of the masochist that's unwilling. Because who the hell likes that? Nobody likes that.
Well,
nobody does.
I don't know. People have very odd sexual proclivities. That's a good question. Apparently, our sexual, let's say, what we like sexually is decided upon when at a very short period of time in around puberty into our early teens. That there's and so what can happen in some cases, I've heard, is just to respond to your question. Some people, if they're somehow experiencing pain and orgasm at the same time, those two things apparently can be crossed in the brain, and they can actually experience a form of pleasure from the pain, right? It's because it sounds weird to you and me. I don't want something.
I think that's a lot of men.
Possibly, that's true. Well, yeah, that's a great question. That's a good question.
I don't know. It's not my world, but I think that, and again, it's sort of like, okay, this reminds me of, who's that guy? Okay, his name's going to come to me in a second. I have to Google it. He's got a Netflix comedy special. He's a South Asian guy, and he had a date with a woman.
Didn't we talk extensively about him?
Yes.
And
yes,
sorry.
Yes.
And sorry.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
He's a perfect example of like,
I think we spent a lot of time talking, and you made some really interesting comments about how he kind of was this sort of feminist kind of like a sort of a Gomeshi type, and how he just wanted to throw him on the bed and drill him and call him an Uber. He actually didn't really care about the whole feelings of feminism.
He said, use a fake name. Okay, but it's like these are women that are growing up for whatever reason who don't have these things clearly defined in their mind. It goes back to the woman on Reddit who thought, well, there's a lot of people having open relationships. I think I'll propose this to my very morally upright boyfriend and just see what happens. Seems like a good idea. Oh, I met this guy. He's super hot. He's Persian and he's super famous, but he wants to smack me around. Something weird. Right. And it's like, you need somebody in your life to say, yes, that's weird. Yeah. I'm sorry if I'm offending anybody. Getting smacked around is weird. And there's nothing good about it. A guy shouldn't be smacking you around. I'm sorry. I'm sorry to say it. It's fact, though.
It does sound very prudish, but on the other hand, I can't necessarily disagree with you. Like, I don't really, again, this is my personal view. I don't really understand the appeal of that. But again, I mean, you really have to be careful with judgment about sexual proclivities, because what if you were to boil it down to, if let's say some guy or some woman or whatever, they like a guy who's tall, or some guy likes Asian women or something, or, small breasts or big breasts, or, you know what I mean? It's like, you could say, well, why? What's the difference? Well, what do you care if, you know what I mean? And you could say, well, who cares if the boobs are big or the boobs are small, or, but for some reason people like those things or they don't like them. Right, that we can't really understand. Where does that end? Because apparently, just to obviously there's a point where it's not acceptable, because apparently pedophilia is a real people. I think psychologists have learned that it is a form of sexuality, in the sense that some people are going to be attracted to underage people, even children. Right. Yeah. Now, these are people who are just going to have to live their lives in, sort of suffering, denial or suffering, knowing.
No, I mean, self-abnegation. They're going to have to deny themselves.
Exactly. They're going to have to deny that to themselves if they want to be a moral person. Right. Yeah. So it could be that maybe the limit for what you're saying is maybe people who like to beat up women while they're having sex with them, maybe they should also they should be like pedophiles, right? That's the case that you're making, right? Like maybe that form of sexuality is just not a good form of sexuality that should exist in some senses, because obviously we're not going to allow people, just because someone wants to have sex with a 6-year-old does not mean that should be, oh, well, that's going to satisfy that person, and maybe they can, talk a 6-year-old into it somehow, right?
All I can say to people who were born that way is like, look, I'm sorry. I mean, but for the most part, I can't pay attention to everything. I keep my head in the sand, and it's very sad. But I mean, I just want to answer to your friend to say, well, wait, these women agreed to
Mhm.
participate in light BDSM or heavy or whatever it was. And my thing is, we are living in an environment where women aren't being properly raised to be of sound mind, to say, no, there's no part of that I want, to understand this is only going to lead to misery. Humanity keeps trying it. They keep trying open marriages, and a derelict media keeps pushing for it. There's part of the media that keeps pushing for that, for the acceptance of minor attracted persons. There's media that's been trying to pull that off. That's how Jimmy Savile operated in plain sight for so long. And it's like, it's mission
British
creep of the perverts.
The British.
And
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because this is sort of opening up something that I'd like to propose to you for a future discussion. Because I'd like to have a talk with you sometime about the whole trans thing. I know we've talked. It's because I think starting it now would be a little bit futile given how long we've been going. But that's actually something, just as a teaser. That's actually something that. There's a woman in the UK called Helen Joyce who's been studying the trans thing. I don't know if you're familiar with her. She says that there have been this thing about the pedophiles. They've been piggybacking onto the gay rights thing, and now with the trans rights thing since the 70s. She found evidence that in the 70s there were people who were campaigning to get the age of consent lowered to 4, not 14, 4, and that they were sort of on the side of the whole gay rights and gay marriage and all that stuff. And there were people in the gay rights movement who knew about this and knew how abhorrent it was, but did not speak out against it because they thought it might make their side, which is understandable, right? You don't, you want to get to the gay marriage, you want to try and move the ball in that direction. But just before we go, is there anything you'd like to comment about that? Because that's going to be our next discussion. Any teasers for our listeners?
Well, okay, I don't want to sound cold toward it or anything, but the way I'm a person who just notices things. And so we all know about this Gramscian influence on the culture that started in the early part of the 20th century. 20th century? Yes. And we've seen
early 1920s. Yeah, Antonio Gramsci was an Italian philosopher who published a lot of Marxist type stuff. Yeah.
And we're still seeing the ripples of his influence, because all of his followers went and embedded themselves in universities, very influential universities, and we've seen it spread like wildfire, and we've seen it spread like wildfire through institutions and through the media and so forth. And this sort of concerted effort of the postmodernists to make the normal seem weird and the weird seem normal.
That's interesting.
And and these are the things that I notice, and then it becomes fetish creep. So it's like, you've got your fetish, that's great, it's a free world, keep it behind closed doors. And then all of a sudden it's like you've got a shop teacher in Etobicoke, and he's got 2 ginormous milk cans underneath a wafer thin t-shirt, and he's teaching kids. This is fetish creep. Balenciaga, that is fetish creep. Because there's a passage in the Bible, Luke said, what would be kept behind closed doors, we shouted from the rooftops. As the Chinese like to say, beware your thoughts, they become your actions, and so forth. So, whatever it is you're thinking in private, suddenly it comes spilling out. Balenciaga, I mean, fashion is punking us all the time, and us normals are kind of scratching our head and going, oh, look at that. It's like, about this fashion trend that appeared in the 80s, and it keeps reemerging like Dracula from the grave, and it's called warcore or dystopian fashion. You see a lot of black ragged. Balenciaga had its fashion show with these cadaverous. It was in a mud pit, and it was these cadaverous models with greasy hair and dead zombie expressions and black leather and buckles and so forth. And it's like, okay, I get it. That's your thing. You're dark. That's fine. But then what happens? They have this sort of gift edit that appears on Instagram a few weeks ago, and it's got children, and it's got teddy bears in bondage gear.
Wow.
And then they're parading teddy bears with black eyes on the runway. And then this was the big giveaway. There was a Supreme Court ruling, and it had to do with child pornography, and could removing child pornography be perceived as a violation of the First Amendment, blah, blah, blah. Can't remember the name of this particular decision, but it was printed out and appeared inside the image with children and teddy bears and purse and $4,500 wallets. And it was like, hey, that's mission creep. You like BDSM. You like a little dystopia. You like things dark and dreary, and you want to reference climate change and Armageddon, and that's all great. Okay, so now the children have come in. So the reaction was furious backlash. Balenciaga's apologized. They pulled every last image from,
Amazing.
This is fetish creep, and it's like, you just want to say, back off, man. Back off my kids.
We've come full circle because we mentioned Elon Musk's kids, and then earlier on we were saying how, kids should not be involved in that. And the one thing I would say, it sounds like your entire, your speech here is basically like the song, the Beatles song, "You've Got to Hide Your Love Away." "Hide Your Love" is a Rolling Stones song, So listen, it's been a real pleasure. It's been a very, how shall I describe this, wandering conversation in different ways. We had some technical issues, but I'm glad we got this one done. And I'm really looking forward to getting back to the trans issue and all that stuff, because I think that's a huge thing that you and I, we originally we were going to discuss that Matt Walsh film.
We will. And the obliteration of gender is definitely a Gramscian reverberation, plain and simple.
So folks, get ready for that one. We're going to be going into Marx and Gramsci and James Lindsay, and and child porn and all kind of crazy stuff. So listen, thanks, Liz.
Thank you, Jason. Look forward to listening to it.